All right, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I'm an avid herpetologist, and today we're going to be doing a little bit of a self-indulgent video. I thought it would be a fun idea to compile all of the commanders that I have built for the Magic the Gathering EDH format over the years and rank them on a tier list. This is basically going to be a fun video where I just kind of go over my long history. I've been playing Magic the Gathering since 2013, and Commander is one of the earlier formats that I got involved with. It is a ton of fun. For those of you unfamiliar, very briefly, Commander, or EDH, or short for Elder Dragon Highlander, is a 100 card singleton format, meaning you can only play a deck containing one commander, which is going to be a legendary creature, and the color identity of that creature dictates the colors you can use in your deck, and then 99 cards, all of which you can only control or use one single copy of each of those cards except for your basic lands. So it's a very fun format. It's inspired a lot of creativity. It's inspired a lot of competitiveness. There's a lot of things you can do in the space, and over the years, as it turns out, I've been compiling all of the different decks that I have built, all of the different commanders that I have used. It turns out I have actually, at the time of making this video, created exactly 60 different commanders that I've used in various decks. So I'm going to be going through and ranking each of them. We're going to be ranking not only the commander itself, but also the deck, how much fun I had playing the cards, how long I may have kept the deck together, how cool I think the deck ultimately is, how cool the commander is. Everything is going to be basically weighing in on my rating system here, and it is the most subjective list you are probably ever going to see. These are all decks that I really just wanted to reminisce. Like I said, I've played 60 of these different guys over the years, and I just kind of wanted to look back and reflect and see how I've kind of grown as a player and all the places that I've been on the way to where I am now. This is a video I'm making in January of 2023. Obviously, the number of legendary creatures keeps on growing, and so will the number of decks that I have played. But at the time of making this video, like I said, 60 different commander decks. So we're going to go through each one of these, and I'll be grading them on a scale. So our S tier decks up here, the best of the best. These are going to be the decks that I have found the most enjoyable. Whether those decks are still together or not, these are decks that were a lot of fun to play with. These are decks that were very unique, had cool interactions, were just very flavorful. There's lots that have to be fed in, and everything has to line up just right in order for me to rank a deck all the way up in S tier. A tier here is good times, decks that I really enjoyed having together and may have even revisited on more than one occasion. Plenty of these commanders have been disassembled and reassembled more than once. So A tier, still plenty good, decks that I've really enjoyed, but weren't quite good enough to get into S tier. B is passable. There are plenty of these commanders that I built just for kicks and giggles, played a couple games with them, maybe kept them together for a month or two, and then they found their way into my bulk bin with all of the other deck fodder and chaff that I have lying around. So these are commanders that had their fun, had their time in the sunlight, and then just were abruptly forgotten about. Speaking of which, our C tier here is forgettable. These are commanders that I built, but couldn't tell you a whole lot about the experiences I had with them. They're serviceable for the time. I thought maybe they'd be a neat idea, but either didn't exactly put up to the standards that I was hoping they would, or just didn't wind up being super enjoyable to play with. And then in D tier, we have mistakes, commanders that I was probably better off not making in the first place. And yes, there will be quite a few decks that fit in the D tier for various reasons, and I'll briefly talk about why each deck is going to go into the tier that it does. Starting us off, we are going to be doing our colorless commanders. We have plenty of single color commanders, 2 color, 3 color, so on and so forth. So that is how we're doing the initial groupings here, but they are not in order of building. They are just in color specific order. And we are going to start off, as I said, with our colorless commanders. To begin, we have Kozilek, the Great Distortion. This is a deck I am immediately going to put into the mistake tier. So I like Kozilek of the Eldrazi. I think Kozilek is my favorite of all of them. I think its design is super, super cool. And card draw is something I really enjoy as a player. So I thought I would really like playing this deck. Kozilek I wound up building is kind of like Myr Tribal. It was just basically an excuse to play Kozilek as a colorless commander. And it became clear very fast that the Myr archetype is just woefully weak, or at least was at the time of when I made the deck, and all the deck wound up being was hard ramp into Kozilek and then just 2-shot people, which really wasn't a lot of fun. It basically became kill the Kozilek player before they kill you, which obviously anyone who's tried to play an Eldrazi, especially as a commander, not probably super unfamiliar with that mentality, so he's going to be in the mistake tier. Traxos, on the other hand, I think Traxos is going to be either in B or C. So when I built Traxos, it was actually to make Golem Tribal. I'm going to leave him in B for now. Maybe I do drop him down to C. He was okay. Golem Tribal is a neat idea. It ended up being kind of fun. The deck had a couple of little wins under its belt. Not a lot to write home about, but I did actually wind up remaking Golem Tribal with a different commander at the helm, and I ended up having a little bit more fun with it. So I think we're going to leave Traxos down in C tier. Now we're going to get on into our single colors. I did have played a single mono black commander, that is the Haunt of High Tower, and Haunt of High Tower, it was definitely forgettable. Not a super great deck. I built it as Spectre Tribal, which, to be fair, may have been doomed from the start. Again, I think Spectres as a creature type are really cool. It's probably my favorite black creature type, but the deck itself wasn't super great. I played it a couple times and then took it apart. Ooh, Arcanus the Omnipotent. So this is actually one of my favorite creatures of all time. I really, really like Arcanus. He was one of the very first EDH decks I ever built. Now, he's probably going to wind up near the bottom of A tier, because I really do look back fondly on my times playing Arcanus, but at the time I was still pretty new to the game, as were a lot of the people that I was playing with, and this was kind of a combo deck before we really knew how to define what a combo deck was. This was like my sophomore year in college. We were all just having a good time, but Mono Blue Arcanus was just kind of the first combo deck, and it wound up being like a little higher, I think, than what most of our playgroups were trying to do. There's a classic story I could tell you guys about sitting at an EDH table at the community college I was at the time. Player had an Iona in play. Iona was still legal at the time, naming Blue, and one of my friends took pity on me to remove the Iona, only for the person who had the Iona in play to curse him for the mistake he had just made, because Arcanus wound up storming off the next turn. But still a very cool card. It's a very simple design to draw 3 cards. We're going to leave him in A tier. He was a lot of fun. Jalira. Now, Jalira is another very early commander I built from 2015. I think Jalira is probably an A tier, actually. It's a very simple commander, but the idea of polymorphing as a theme for your deck was actually very fun. There's a lot of cool things to build around. It's very similar to kind of what Atla Palani did later on. But I actually liked this build better. I just like sea monsters as a whole. So I've tried doing the sea monster theme a lot of different times. Jalira was one of those earlier iterations, so I think we're going to put here probably near the bottom of A tier. I actually really look back on my time with Jalira pretty fondly. Lorthos. Lorthos the Tidemaker, a very cool card who is extremely forgettable as a commander. This card, again, was an early attempt at doing Sea Monster Tribal. I think it was actually before I did Jalira. Lorthos was, again, he's a cool card. In the 99, I think the card's very neat. As a commander, not so much. He's an 8 mana 8/8, which on the surface is just kind of middling, not very great, even by old commander standards. And his effect to spend 8 to tap 8 permanents down is at this weird point where it's like too good for super casual groups, where you don't want to be freezing 8 permanents. It's a little much, especially if you hit lands. So not a super great commander overall, not super fond of that. Orvar the Allform. Now this is a very unique commander. I'm going to put him in passable. I don't know why I didn't enjoy this deck more. It was actually a very cool deck. The way you build it, I actually featured him in a top 10 unique build around commander video that I did. He's a neat guy, but I don't know. There's just something about the deck that didn't really gel well with me. I would say he's probably near the top of B tier, but I don't think I would put him too much higher than that. Slinvada the Rising Deep. All right, now Slinvada. Slinvada is, again, a Dominaria commander who is meant to kind of be a sea monster tribal deck. He's definitely impassable. Like, I didn't hate the time I spent with Slinvada, but as again, an 8 mana commander, 10 if you want to do the kicker, which is totally worth it. His kicker is very good, but he's just very slow, especially in a mono blue deck. He's cool. I like the flavor behind the commander. I think he's very awesome. Apparently the flavor behind, or the lore behind this guy is the spikes on his back are actually a merfolk city that he carries around, which is why his effect does include merfolk, which I think is pretty neat. But yeah, he's going to be here in passable. He was okay, but not the best. Talrand. Now Talrand is, as again, a creature. I have a lot of fun times with Talrand. I actually played him in Modern quite a bit. I think I'm going to put him near the top of C tier, actually. Talrand just kind of winds up being very one trick, where you're just playing a lot of instants and sorceries, you make drakes, and that's pretty much all he does. You can play like some buffs, which I remember doing, like Gravitational Shift, Favorable Winds, Sunken City, but he doesn't really do a whole lot. Like, his games can get very stale because he just kind of does the same thing over and over. Ooh, Unesh the Cryosphinx. Now this is definitely going to go into the mistake tier. So Unesh seems very fun on the surface, right? It's Sphinx tribal, Factor Fiction tribal. This deck is extremely gear spinny. It's one of those decks that is most likely not good enough to compete in your higher competitive tiers, but it is way too much, I found out, for some of the lower tiers. The decks, or the turns that this deck can take a very long time to get through. You ultimately just spam effect after effect after effect, and people get tired of resolving their third or fourth factor fiction in the same turn. Unesh was cool. I did enjoy playing the deck, but that deck was definitely well above what I was expecting it to be at. That deck was heartily a mistake for the casual groups I built it for. All right, Gargos. Another one of my favorite creature types, Hydras. Gargos is, again, at the making of this video, probably the best Hydra commander that is out there. That doesn't necessarily say a whole lot. Hydras as a creature type are still very clunky. Gargos being able to reduce cost by 4 is a great effect for that creature type, but that doesn't necessarily make him super duper playable. It's a fun deck, though. His other build around is being able to target things to have him fight, which is very cool. So, yeah, I'll put him in good times. I actually have enjoyed, if you're going to build a mono-green deck, Gargos is at least a very fun one where you can do a lot of unique stuff. Ronus the Indomitable. I'm going to put him here in passable. He's very middling. When I built Ronus, it was actually Death Touch, or rather Venom Tribal. Not only did I want Death Touch, but I wanted specifically Death Touch creatures that were like venomous animals. So that's spiders, snakes, basilisks. Very, very fun. Basically, the whole idea of the deck was make a ton of mana and then Falcon Punch someone by putting it all through Ronus's pump ability and just hit somebody with like a 1/1 with Death Touch with like plus 20 plus 0. Like it was goofy. It was fun. It was absolutely serviceable for how I built it. And yeah, we'll leave him impassable there. Around me. All right, so we're going to start getting into our dual color commanders here, starting with Dimir. Around me, I would say, is a passable commander. Probably above Ronus, maybe even above Orvar. Around me is, again, a commander where you can use some pretty unique cards, and there's some really cool interactions you can do. There's cards that have like death triggers that you can get multiple copies of in a single turn. Anything that has Myriad, you'll get 3 copies of that because you made, 3 tokens. So these really neat interactions. I really like the kind of plays you can make with Arami. I wouldn't say he's necessarily one of my good times commanders, though. Blue-black isn't like one of my favorite color combinations in the world, but as far as blue-black goes, yeah, Arami is definitely really up there, and I got to make use of some of my favorite black cards like Massacre Worm. So there's that. We have Gyruda, Doom of the Depths. Gyruda, I would say, where would I put Gyruda? Definitely in passable, maybe honestly in forgettable. I don't know. I didn't have Gyruda together for too terribly long. It was one of the many commanders I built for my Ikoria. Ikoria is my favorite set of all time currently. I love the big monster themes. I love the Godzilla promos. And yes, I did have the Gigan promo for Gyruda when I built it. It just, of course, is just kind of blue-black Reanimator, and there's some cool stuff you can do with it, especially you kind of have a mini deck building restriction where you have to use even-costed creatures, but wasn't, like, super neat. Nothing to really write home about there. Shevel, Bane of Monsters, pretty forgettable. I thought this deck sounded cool. It's basically, again, green-black Death Touch. Every turn you can put bounty counters, you can draw cards, gain life, but only being able to put out 1 bounty counter at a time, since as long as there's one in play, you don't really get to place another, didn't wind up doing a whole lot for me. It was just very slow. Didn't really seem like it accomplished a whole lot. Omnath, Locus of Rage, one of the, again, very early commanders that I built. Not super interesting to play with, though. I thought it was pretty forgettable. I know a lot of people who have a lot of good times and good memories with their Omnath, Locus of Rage decks, and more power to you. I don't know. I like landfall decks, honestly, and I even like the elemental creature type, but just wasn't super interesting. You make a bunch of 5/5s, you swing with them. I honestly found Talrand more interesting than that, so I'm going to leave him pretty low and forgettable. Ulash the Hate Seed, another opportunity to try and make a Hydra tribal deck. Definitely one of my more forgettable ones, though. I would probably put him down here. Above Lorthos, maybe above Haunt. Maybe even above Omnath. I don't know. Yeah, we'll put him right about there. That feels about right. Ulash is a pretty neat commander, but not too super duper interesting. Just again, tried to make bad Hydra tribal. Vrondis. Now, Vrondis is kind of interesting. It's basically like the Dinosaur Enrage mechanic where you make a bunch of 5/4s, but you have to jump through a bunch of extra hoops because they die when they hit things. So I'm going to put him kind of at the bottom of passable. He was alright. I didn't hate playing with Vrondis, but he definitely wasn't one of the more interesting ones I've made. We have Gyerson Starn Kellermorph. Now, I actually want to get more play in with this guy. He's super, super interesting. Now, the most interesting thing about Gyerson Starn He's another very unique build around where you want to play a bunch of creatures that can ping for 1 damage, which is not super great in like regular casual EDH, but becomes more playable in competitive EDH where you have a lot more smaller bodies. Things like Professional Facebreaker, Floodgates of all sorts and sizes. You have cards like Dockside that you can ping off. So he's interesting. I'm going to put him at the top of passable. I haven't played too many games with him yet, but he's one that I actually would like very much to continue playing. So we're going to leave him right there for now. Jory N. Jory N is actually a very unique and very cool creature where you get to draw cards and when you cast your 2nd card per turn. Now when I built Jory N, the whole idea behind it was actually to build a blue-red Ominous Seas themed deck. The whole goal of the deck is to tutor out Ominous Seas and then just draw a bunch of cards and spam Krakens. That was literally the whole purpose of the deck. And Jorian was who I ended up having at the helm. Now, Ominous Seas is my favorite Magic card of all time. I think it is super flavorful. I think it's super cool. It's a unique build around. And I've had a lot of fun with that deck. It's actually very cool. It fits really nice in that niche where I want it to, where it's not super competitive, but it's also not going to roll over in a casual or your slightly more competitive environment. So it kind of fits right in that little sweet spot. I definitely have had some good times with Jorian. I'm going to leave her right there at the top of A. Speaking of good times being had, Niv Mizzet Firemind. This is the first competitive EDH deck that I built strictly for the purposes of being competitive. Now, Firemind did pretty well. I think I, to my credit, built that deck pretty effectively. Had quite a few wins under my belt. Wound up moving on to some other commanders as I kind of got my feet wet in playing actual competitive EDH, but I definitely have fond memories of Niv Mizzet. He and Arcanus, I think, are kind of interchangeable here. I have a lot of good memories with both of them, but I'm going to order it like that. Dramoka the Eternal. Another very interesting one. So, honestly, another big theme that I've built a lot of decks around in the past is the +1/+1 counter theme. Dramoka was my first attempt at building a +1 counter themed deck. I think we're going to put Dramoka right around like mid to high passable tier. Having a specific dragon build around in just green-white was very unique, so you got to use some pretty cool dragons that don't necessarily see play in other decks. You still get to play around with the +1 counter theme, so there's lots of support that goes along with that as well. Yeah, just a very unique commander. Definitely have some good memories playing Dramoka. I mentioned having a rebuild of the Golem tribal deck, and that is going to be this guy right here, Iktakik, with the partner being Rebek. So these two pair really well in an artifact-themed deck, especially Golem Tribal for Iktakik. I would say Iktakik is probably in the passable tier. It's not going to be quite as high as some of these other ones. I think right about there is probably right. It was cool. Didn't keep it together for too terribly long, but the decks that I played with it were actually very fun. Golems are an interesting card type with some big bodies, so very fun stuff to do there. Next we have AC, Tyrant of Gyre Strait. I want more than anything to like this commander more than I honestly do. It checks so many boxes for me. It's my favorite color combination of green and blue. It's a giant sea serpent. Maybe one of the big hangups for me is honestly the art. I like what the art is going for with like the mist and the giant serpent and everything, but the position he's in is just kind of awkward. I don't know. There's something about him that I'm just not a huge fan of, but I'm going to put him near the top of passable at least. Maybe that's not right. Maybe I'll put him at the bottom of good times because AC is kind of an alternative to another commander on this list that I've just enjoyed playing significantly more. So I'm going to put AC right about there. I love the theme of the deck of playing lands and drawing cards. Those are two things that I just like doing as a Magic player in general. Those are my favorite for sure. Yeah, there's just something about him that I just don't like as much, and I really wish that wasn't the case. Maybe he just needs a good alt art. Maybe that's all I really need is just get a new artwork and get my interest in him up a little bit. Eric's Methus, another one of my favorite creatures of all time. Eric's Methus, I'm going to put in passable. I'm going to put him in the top. I really do like the card. Problem is in the command zone, I realize he has a lot of infinites that can happen shockingly easy. Which was not really the intention. The deck was not abusive enough that I'm going to put it into the mistake tier, but yeah, he was just kind of one of many, as you can see. I got a lot of green-blue commanders on this list. I don't know, he was okay, just not a whole lot to write home about. Now this one, on the other hand, I do have some good times remembered with this one. This is going to be Brynlin the Moonkraken and Galanra. So Brynlin Galanra is, again, a green-blue partner with the theme being converted mana cost 6 or higher tribal. So this is one of my more favorite green, or I guess Simic commander decks that I've built. Brandon Galanra is very cool, has a very nice top end, pretty reasonable floor as well. There's not too many bad things to do with this deck, where you've got a nice top end with Brynlin, a way to get there with Galanra. The two partner very well together, so that was a pretty neat deck. Something very similar coming up behind it is Emoti, which is going to be right around the same place. These two were pretty much very similar shells. I will say that when I built Emoti, I specifically restricted myself to using Karuga as the companion for the deck. So I wasn't able to use anything that costed, I think it's 2 or less. Basically, everything in your deck has to cost 3 mana or more. Now, there's ways to skirt this. You can have things with alternate casting costs that let you play them for cheaper, but the primary casting cost can't be less than 3. So it was a very neat deck. Cascade as a mechanic is, I think, personally very fun, but at the same time, it can be a little bit of a hassle for people. So maybe I do just kind of bump him down a little bit lower, just because, again, people don't necessarily want to watch you cascade 6 times in a turn. So even though I personally enjoy the deck, I know it could be a little bit more grating. We'll put him there. Ooh, perfect. So here we're going to have our first S tier. This is Kennesos. Kennesos is a pretty new commander at the time of this video. Just came out in the new Jumpstart over the last couple of months. And this card finally, for me, checked all of the boxes for a phenomenal sea monster commander. It comes out at only 2 mana, which is not a lot. It's very cheap to play and has a very nice ability that lets you bring in the sea serpents off the top of your deck, so you don't even lose card advantage. I think this card was extremely well designed. I think it is perfect to finally fit the awesome niche of needing a good sea serpent, or I guess sea monster commander. So I'm definitely going to put Kennesos in my S tier. I can see myself, I still have it together. I foresee keeping this deck together for quite a while. It's so much fun. And again, checks those boxes where it's not too competitive while not being too casual. It's like right in that sweet spot. So I'm having a blast playing Kennesos. Coma. Now Coma, on the other hand, Coma is kind of weird. When he's in the command zone, your whole goal is to ramp the card out, and then everyone else's whole goal is to keep him off the board. So it winds up kind of taking over the game and making the whole game kind of about itself. I thought about building Toxrill for a little while, and I wound up not doing it for the same reason, where I didn't want the whole game to just be me playing a game of Arc Enemy, and Coma is definitely an Arc Enemy commander. I did not keep him together for too terribly long. I'm going to put him here in the D tier, just because I think he's cool and a great boss monster in the 99. In the command zone, I think he's just got a little too much of an influence on how the game winds up getting played. So he wasn't like super egregious, but I definitely don't think it was a good idea making him as a commander. I'm going to leave him down there. Lonus, Cryptozoologist. I'm going to leave Lonus somewhere up here. Probably right around where Jalira is, actually. Lonus, again, is a pretty cool, pretty unique commander where you can play lots of little creatures on your side of the board, make a bunch of clues, and then try to take things from your opponent's decks. Makes use of some pretty cool cards. You can use things like Lantern of Insight to check if there's anything valuable on top of the opponent's decks. All in all, just a pretty unique build around. No complaints there. Marit. Now, Marit may surprise you guys. I had a lot of fun with this card. So Marit is... he's a changeling that keeps changeling and basically copies. He's a clone in your command zone, kind of similar to like Sakashima, but not quite to the same extent. It really wants to lean into the changeling mechanic where you keep all the creature types. So the way I wound up building it was this really cool, kind of funky changeling tribal where it's tribal. Basically a ton of tribal buffs for like different things. You had like Merfolk Lords, Elf Lords, Sliver Lords, like all of these things that gave these really cool tribal themed buffs, and then a bunch of changelings that count as everything to take advantage of all of them at the same time. It was different, it was wacky, it was zany, very, very cool. I think I'm probably going to put it here near the top of passable. Definitely not like one of the stronger decks I built. That was one of the big holdups, is it was still a little bit on the weak side, but yeah, I definitely did enjoy playing with Marit, I will say that. Here we are, Tatyava. Now, Tatyava is my pet deck. This is the deck I have spent quite a bit fine-tuning, foiling out. This is the deck I've had together for the longest period of time, and will probably have together for the longest period of time. This is my CEDH deck of choice. I absolutely adore this commander. It is so much fun to play. Again, playing lands, drawing cards, and attacking, gaining life on there. I For some reason, I love Tadjava so much more than AC. I don't know if it's just the fact that it's cheaper. I don't know if the life gain just comes up more often, so it's more relevant. But I love Tadjava. Tadjava is definitely my favorite commander deck, or at least one of my favorite commander decks that I have ever played. So absolutely deserves a spot up in the S tier. Prime Speaker Vannifar. Now Vannifar, it was interesting, but Vannifar is extremely linear. Vannifar's whole goal is you want to do the exact same thing every single game as consistently as you can, because when you have a breeding or a birthing pod in your command zone, that's basically the goal. You basically are just doing the same line over and over and trying to basically power it out as quickly as turn 2 or 3. It was very boring. I'll just put it that way. It wasn't super interesting. Even when you're playing competitive EDH and people win through the same means very frequently, you know, like Demonic Consultation and Thassa's Oracle, the way that you get there is at least sometimes different. Vannifar is the exact same. It doesn't matter what you start with. You're tutoring out literally the same creatures every single game. It's very consistent. It does what it does well. It's interruptible, of course, but all in all, it's, like I said, just kind of forgettable. I'm going to put her down here in the forgettable tier. I'll put her at the top because I didn't hate the time I spent with Vannifar, but yeah, just in general, not super fantastic. All right, Doran the Siege Tower. Doran, again, was one of the very first commanders I built. I think the second or third commander that I ever built in my commander career. He's a very old card. Unique build around, but other than that, he's just kind of a beat face commander. He's not super duper interesting. I'll put him at the bottom of passable. Just not a whole lot to say. Like, the cards that he makes use of, at least, are very unique, where you're buffing toughness rather than just power. But at the end of the day, he's really just a beat face commander, and there's not a whole lot more depth to it than that. Prava. Now, Prava, I partnered with Ikra Shidiki, which is basically make a bunch of tokens. Prava makes those tokens bigger, where they have +1/+4. And when you hit something with Ikra Shidiki, or any creature you control, you gain life equal to toughness. So it's token aggro that also gains a metric ton of life. Very, very fun and very unique, for sure. I don't know. Tokens have never really been my play style, but it definitely wasn't bad. I would honestly put him pretty close up here near the top of passable. Very fun. Very cool commander there. Grixis. I played 2 Grixis commanders. The first is Kess. My time with Kess is forgettable. There's really not much to say here. Kess was not fantastic. I didn't build it Storm. I built it to be like a casual Spellslinger deck, and it was very middle of the road. Didn't do anything super fantastic. The interactions weren't super exciting. So not a whole lot to say about Kess. We'll leave her down there in forgettable. That's definitely fitting. Nikobolas the Ravager. Welcome to the mistake tier, buddy. We're going to put you below Unesh because I at least enjoyed playing Unesh more than you. Again, I built Nikobolas similar to Haunt of Hightower, where I made it Spectre Tribal, but in Grixis, you have access to a lot more abusive cards than that. Plus, Nikobolas itself flips into a Planeswalker, with some pretty awesome effects. The card itself is very cool. It's very flavorful, but the deck itself wound up being just kind of gross. I just made my opponents discard their whole hands, just trying to lean into his ETB effect. Not super fun to play against, not super fun to play with. It got very stale very fast, so he didn't stay together very long. Gyrus the Waker of Corpses. Now this deck, actually, I'm going to put him all the way up in good times. Gyrus was a very fun commander when I had him together. I might even put him a little bit higher. First of all, the art is fantastic. What an awesome looking creature. But yeah, it's basically like a Jund Reanimator deck, but it does it in such a unique way where you're attacking and making a token by exiling something with less power. So you're basically bringing it in for free, which kind of gives you the ability to do other things. There's just a lot of neat interactions Gyrus can make, more than you might actually expect. I highly recommend, if you've never seen or played with this commander before, look into some of the cards that are recommended for him on like EDH Rec. He's very neat. Very, very cool deck. I actually enjoyed my time with Gyrus a lot. Korvold. Now, I built Korvold as a tokens deck to try to make just like a value engine and basically not just go. I didn't go CEDH with him, but the deck as far as tokens go is pretty forgettable. I'm going to put him down here near the top-ish of forgettable. He just didn't really do a whole lot. Kind of middle of the road. I've said that about a lot of these, but he really was. Just not a whole lot to say about Korvold. Urlock. Now, Urlock is a little bit more unique, where I built the deck basically to take advantage of mana burn with lots of different tax effects that just burned the opponents for doing various things. I would say he's passable. Near the top of passable, sure, but not too much higher than that. Again, I love the card design. I think his artwork is super cool. I love a playable Viashano commander. I think the creature type is, again, very cool. I'm a herpetologist, of course. I love lizards, but As a deck, it kind of fell flat. It just didn't do a whole lot. Like, it's not a very proactive game plan. You're basically just sitting there. You have to play a very, very big defensive game if you want that kind of playstyle to actually win, and didn't get there a whole heck of a lot. So we're going to leave him right there impassable. Atlapalani, very similar. Very similar to Jalira, where you're kind of basically doing polymorph tribal, sacking eggs and getting creatures off the top, but I don't know. For some reason, there's just something that was less interesting about Atlapalani to me. I would put her, like, up here. Like, she's definitely passable. I wouldn't put her below passable by any stretch of the imagination, but, like, not my favorite commander in the world. It was neat, though. Kind of fun. Gahiji. Gahiji, I would also put right around the same place, maybe a little bit higher. Being able to encourage people to enjoy the combat step a little bit more by hitting the opponents, playing a lot of goad effects and things like that. Gahiji's a very cool guy. He kind of pokes his head into play groups every once in a while. He's a very old commander, but just by the nature of his effect, you'll see him show up every now and again. I've had a lot of fun with Gahiji, so we'll put him there in passable. Gishath. All right, where do I want Gishath? I might actually put Gishath right up here near the bottom of S tier. Now, Gishath, when I first read this card, checked so many boxes off for me. It's a Naya commander, which isn't necessarily my favorite. Like, obviously, if you're seeing my list here, I'm a big blue player. But, man, when you want a Naya commander, you really can't get more Naya than Gishath. Like, this card does everything it needs to do. First of all, the artwork is baller. I love the dinosaur theme. It has haste, vigilance, and trample, which is a phenomenal combination. And there's a lot of ways you can do them, where you can just build straight beats. You can build around the enrage mechanic. He is just everything you would ever want in a dinosaur commander. I don't necessarily think they're ever going to print a better dinosaur commander than Gishath. He is super cool. Even though I don't currently have Gishath together, he is a commander I do come back to every so often because of how much I do enjoy playing the deck. He doesn't usually stay together for super long periods of time, just because, again, when you're churning through the deck with his attack trigger, games can get a little bit samey sometimes, but every time I build him a little bit different, and I always come back to him. I think the card is really, really neat. Marith, another failed attempt at Hydra Tribal is what I ended up building Marith as. There's lots of ways you can build Marith. That's the way I went to with him, and he's going to be right down here with Ulash. It's just kind of forgettable. Muldratha. I built Muldratha as Enchantress, and I think Enchantress Muldratha is solidly passable. It's not the worst in the world, not the best. It wound up being a little bit gross in some circumstances. Being able to bring back things like Spore Frog every turn can be a little mean, but not too bad. I've definitely had worse experiences with cards than Muldratha. Otrimi was very forgettable. I have played another Mutate Commander that's going to place much higher. When it comes to Mutate Commanders, I did not enjoy Otrimi all that much. It's just very basic. You're just doing combat tricks for the most part, which in Sultai is okay. At least it's different for the colors, but not a whole lot more to say there. Sidisi. Sidisi is either my second or third commander. It's between Sidisi and Doran as my second and third. I built her as my very first attempt at a Reanimator deck. And I didn't play it combo. It was just good old-fashioned mill cards, bring back big things. It did okay. I actually had that deck together for a surprising amount of time, and it was fun. Nothing really bad to say about Sidisi. She was passable. I think she's perfect definition for how that tier goes. Animar. Animar, the Soul of Elements. Now, I want very much to put Animar up in the S tier, because Animar is the first commander I ever built. I really love this guy. He's very cool looking. His effect was exactly what I was looking for. Teamer is my favorite color combination, and I wanted a creature-themed, like creature-centric deck. And Animar fits both of those, obviously, to a T. The problem with Animar is there's not really a way to build a weak Animar deck unless you are proactively trying. If you put even a little effort into deck building this guy, he's going to be abusively strong, which is kind of frustrating, honestly, because he's going to wind up being not quite strong enough for competitive, because people who know how to handle him will handle him and you won't do anything in the game, but he is just so much stronger than he needs to be for a casual game. So he's in this weird, like, pub stomping bubble that he can't seem to dig his way out of. I'm definitely putting him in good times. He is the very top of the good times tier for sure. But unfortunately, I think his pub stomping nature I'm just going to have to keep him out of the S tier, I think, as much as I would love to put him up there. Next we have Averna. Averna was a Cascade-themed commander. It was passable. The deck was either Flood or Famine, which is not really a great playstyle. You don't want a deck that either does everything or does nothing, and Averna definitely fit that. The addition of being able to play lands out was kind of neat, so you can kind of add like a little mini landfall theme in there in a way that at least takes a little more finesse than like your traditional landfall commanders. But I don't necessarily think that it was super, I don't know. There's just something about it that kind of held it back. I don't think she's at the bottom. I'll put her right around the middle here, probably right about there. Ooh, all right. Illuna, the Apex of Wishes, or in my case, Ghidorah, the Godzilla promo. I'm going to put this pretty high up here. So this is the teamer deck that I play as my like solid 75% deck, where basically it's you're able to build teamer good stuff. You can put in all your big splashy beat sticks. You can put in all of like the things that you want in your teamer deck. You can put in an Illuna deck. You don't have to build Mutate if you don't want to. But if you decide to build around it even a little bit, you wind up having just this really fun deck where you just kind of basically are cascading into big splashy permanents. You can get really cool interactions with the Mutate mechanic. I think Mutate is actually a very fun mechanic, despite how frustrating it can be to understand. So I'm going to definitely put that near the top of my good times tier. Illuna definitely earned the space there. Next up, we have Intet the Dreamer. Oh no, bottom mistake tier with you. So Intet, unfortunately, I have to formally apologize to the members of my play group. When I built Intet, it was, again, early on in my Magic career, and it was a full-blown Chaos deck. It played a lot of just stomach-turning cards like Scrambleverse, Possibility Storm, Eye of the Storm, Knowledge Pool, let me think, Dulcet Sirens, Thieves Auction, just frustrating cards to play against. The whole theme of the deck was just, ooh, I'm messing with the flow of the game, it's so funny, but God, it's just not. If you're in your point in your Magic career where you find these decks amusing, I don't want to actively discourage you. I never want to do that. You should be able to play the game however you want, but understand that it's probably only funny for you unless you have a group that is like really into that kind of a game style. Cards like Thieves Auction and Scrambleverse are miserable to resolve, and I absolutely should not have made that deck. That is the very bottom of mistake tier. Funnily enough, right after the bottom of mistake tier, we are going to move to the very top of S tier. The favorite EDH deck I have built in my entire Magic career by a mile and a half has to be Calamax. Calamax is, again, it's very similar to Ghidorah and Illuna, where it is right where it needs to be. You can build it super competitive, you can build it a little more on the casual side, and you can build it in that sweet spot there where it just fits the niche you need it to perfectly. It's a very flexible, adaptive deck. It's capable of very big plays, but it's also capable of being built without just destroying the entire table. It has just the right amount of build around and power level involved, where you can make some really cool, awesome plays that you couldn't necessarily make in other decks. You can play lots of really cool ramp instants, again, that you wouldn't necessarily see play in other decks, that you're doubling value. There's so much fun that you can have in a Calamax deck. It's got a unique deck building convention where he needs to be tapped in order to do his effect. So you can play things like vehicles, cards like Springleaf Drum. It's so unique. It's such a fun deck. I love my Calamax deck very, very much. It is the most fun I've ever had playing an EDH deck. He will definitely be staying together for a very long time. All right, Omnath, Locus of Creation. I'm going to put Omnath near the top of passable. Omnath, again, is one of those commanders where I built it as elemental tribal. Tribal decks are either going to be super fun or super stale. I think this Omnath kind of falls in the center there, where at least he has the additional landfall mechanic to mix the deck up a little bit and maybe make it a little more fun, where it's not quite the same game every single time. But he's still going to be a full tribal deck, and tribal decks, unless they are like super, super wild and awesome, which to be fair, elementals are very cool as a creature type. I don't know. It was kind of passable to me. I could maybe put it in good times, but I think passable is right. Sirach Dragonclaw. Ironically, I'm actually going to put this card in good times. Not necessarily near the top, but he's definitely not the bottom of good times. Sirach is a very, very simple card. It's 5 mana, has flash, and gives your other creatures trample, and he and your other creatures can no longer be countered. So he is a very honest, very straightforward teamer beatdown kind of card. And if you build him in a way that really abuses the fact that your creatures can be countered with lots of like nice ETB effects and things like that, he's actually very fun. He's actually a card I can see myself going back to if I just wanted to play good old-fashioned just teamer beatdown and I ever got tired of Ghidorah here. Sirach is definitely a good fallback. Last one here for my teamer commanders is Xyrus. Now, Xyrus is he's again in this kind of weird spot where what he does, I tried to build him competitive at first and he didn't quite cut it. He was a cool storm deck where you can wheel, but he's not like Nekuzar Storm. He makes creatures instead of dealing damage, which opens for you some unique lines. But the problem with the way that he works is if you want those lines to actually go somewhere, you need very specific other pieces like Goblin Bombardment, Impact Tremors. Like there's more setup you need to do for him. So I think he's very cool. Now I actually have him together as a more casual deck where it's just lots of like Howling Mines, Dictative Crewfix, effects like that, like Font of Mythos, that just have everybody drawing bonus cards to just do snake aggro, which is actually very fun, which is actually why I've got him up here in good times. He's also got one of the coolest creature types in the game. He's a Snake Leviathan, which is super, super cool. I might actually put him all the way up here. He's definitely a very cool commander. I'm still trying to find the right way to like really make use of him and enjoy my time, but he has a very unique deck building convention. I do enjoy him. All right, we have Rayhan, Last of the Abzan, partnered with Ishai Ojutai Dragon Speaker. I'm going to put him all the way up in S tier. So this is a 4-color deck that's kind of the pinnacle of the +1 counter theme that I very much do enjoy building from time to time. Now, since this deck has access to 4 colors instead of just the 2 that Dromoka had, you can play a lot more variety of the cards in the deck. And what ends up happening is some really neat and unique interactions. There's lots of very cool cards that you can use to support this theme, especially with, like I said, access to all 4 of those colors, especially things like blue, where you have access to Bant, Abzan, Sultai. There's surprisingly diverse a range of things that you can include. The deck is very fun. I have usually one like big 4+ color commander deck at a time because lands are kind of expensive. This is one that I always go back to. It's very fun. I like the +1 counter theme. And it's a nice middle of the road deck where it's strong enough to compete while not being too strong to like overwhelm a casual play group. I also just like, and again, the partner theme here, where first of all, they're both Tarkir commanders, which is very cool, having that synergy. But I like that you can play Rayhan early as your primary game plan and have Ishai as a backup plan where you can just beat face later on if game plan 1 doesn't work so well. So very cool there. Yidris. I built Yidris just as general, like Cascade Tribal, with cards that had reduced costs. You could play a bunch in the same turn. Not super interesting. Kind of similar to Vannifar, which is, it wasn't very fun. I like, again, the theme of the card. I know a lot of people who are big Yidris fans. In fact, a lot of my friends who I know watch the videos on this channel, I'm sure, I know are big Yidris fans. He just never was it for me. Again, it doesn't necessarily understand why. He's got teamer colors with black added, so you'd think he would be up there for me, but something about the way he played, I don't know, just didn't appeal to me. But yeah, he was kind of forgettable, but I do still at least like the card. Joda. I'm going to put Joda up here in good times. I have definitely had some good times with this commander. Most recent way that I built him was actually Legend Tribal before the new Joda ever existed. I've always had the old Joda built. The Fifth of Sun effects lets you play a very, again, colorful, diverse range of cards. Being in 5 color means you have access to every legend, technically, that has ever been printed. And I played some really fun ones. There were, even before the most recent Dominaria set, were a lot of really cool interactions where they had specific legendary creature buffs and things like that. So a lot of good times with Joda. Scion of the Ur-Dragon. I honestly forgot that I had this card built as a deck for a very long time, literally until I made this video. He is interesting. He was my first attempt at a dragon commander deck, which I do actually really like. I like dragons as a commander deck, but he again is kind of this weird niche where technically speaking he's like more combo oriented, but the combo he does is kind of like a one-trick pony. I don't know, he's like okay, like he's not bad, he's just not my favorite. The last commander on this list, though, basically does everything that he did, but in a more fun way to me, and that is the Ur-Dragon. I definitely have to have the Ur-Dragon up here in S tier. Now, I know Eminence as a mechanic is not super popular, and I do understand why, but I feel like the Ur-Dragon is like the perfect execution of the Eminence mechanic. It is taking a creature type that is already generally overcosted, and you are solving that biggest issue where just having all of your dragons be 1 mana cheaper makes the deck so much better. It is the perfect buff. Like if you were to ask prior to this card coming out, what would the buff, like what would dragons need to be playable? Having them all cost 1 less is literally like the answer to that question. Now, to be fair, you could probably say that about any creature type, but dragons are notoriously an overcosted creature type. They have very big, powerful plays, but they're so expensive. And the Dragon, having that from the command zone as an Eminence effect is just, it's perfect. Not only that, but being a 9-costed 10/10 flyer is super flavorful for the actual like lore implications of this card. It is a huge deal in the lore of the game. So when they actually put this onto a card, I feel like they did it just the best version of justice they could possibly have done. They designed this card beautifully. Not only is it a 9-mana commander, so you got to work to get to it, but the payoff when he comes into play of being able to draw cards and cheat things in, oh my goodness, it's just, it's just perfect. Like if you want a solid, I would say like 70 to 85% just mid-range beatdown deck that has the ability to pinch and pivot, has access to 5 colors. Dragon is, you won't get better than Dragon. I mean, this card is just, it's fun to play with. It's scary, but it doesn't take miserably long turns. It's just honest, beat people's faces in with big flying dragons. And I mean, at the end of the day, what more can you ask for from an EDH deck? And that's going to about do it. This has actually been a lot of fun, kind of revisiting and reminiscing all of these different commanders that I have built. Even in the mistakes, I have fun memories to look back on with every single one of these commanders. And even though I do have to just have decided to, grade them best to worst, and I think I like where this list is sitting at right now. Yeah, every single one of them, whether they're good or bad, they're all part of my career as a Magic player. And honestly, I hope that you guys take the time to kind of do something similar and just look back on all of the different decks and places that you've gone and over the course of your card game careers. For those of you who have been into these hobbies for as long as I have, where I've been doing this ever since I was a kid, not Magic specifically, but card games as a whole, being able to reminisce and just kind of see where you've come from and how far you've come, it's fun. It's very humbling. So yeah, with that, guys, that is going to about do it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to leave a like and subscribe and leave a comment down below. Let me know some of your favorite commanders that you've played over the years. If you guys have enjoyed the content, I hope you'll come back and check out our next video. With that, I've been an avid herpetologist. I hope you all have a great rest of your night, and I will see you all next time.